it's quite clear that the regulator has the power to remove the license to operate of an owner. What's not quite clear is what that actually means in practice, because there is an interaction effectively between this regulation, which is now law, right? So this is not just a sporting body. This is a government-backed regulator, so it's gone through Parliament. And then, of course, the law of effectively property ownership, right? So it's one thing saying this person no longer has a license to operate this club, but what does that actually mean in terms of their equity ownership of that club, which is obviously literally an asset which is owned by that owner? Can the regulator force that owner to divest it? Now, of course, one thing that they can hold over that owner, which the Football League started with De Jong at Reading, if you remember, back in about March, they basically said to him, you need to sell or else we're basically going to close you down. Now, what you're kind of saying to an owner there is, take what's on the table now, or else you might get zero, right? There is no route by which you get to run a nice, lengthy, long auction process here. If you don't sell now, you will end up potentially with your club being closed down. But of course, this is very difficult, isn't it? Because from the fans' perspective, they want the owner out, but of course, they don't want their club closed down. So this is going to be a really, really interesting test case that's going to play out in the next few weeks. Now, let's have a look and see what's actually going on here, right? Which is Chansiri has got a price on the club of about £60 million, right? I have that on very, very good authority from people who have spoken to him, right? If you're not willing to submit an indicative offer of more than 50 million, he's not even willing to speak to you, right? So at the moment, because the club looks absolutely dead cert for relegation, that creates a very difficult situation, because Sheffield Wednesday in League One, with significant capex requirements, in other words, this is spending on the stadium and the training ground, which is required, probably the equity value of the club, bearing in mind the money that needs to be spent on Hillsborough and the training ground, is probably more like about £20 million, maybe £25 million, because you need to spend 10 on the facilities to make sure that you can actually operate the thing properly. So if you bought it for 2025 and then spent 10, you're at 35, which would come close to the most expensive of any club that's ever been in League One, which was my old club, Sunderland, which achieved a valuation towards the top end of that for a minority stake whilst in League One. So there's that problem looming, right? But in the meantime, Chansiri can't pay the wages because he's got no revenue coming in, Adrian, because what's happened is the Sheffield Wednesday fans have simply stopped spending, right? Now, let's just, if you just bear with me a bit, I'm sort of aware this is a bit of a monologue, but I will let you come back in at some point. But I want to get all the facts out onto the table here, because I've spoken to people, I've looked at it, I've checked through the numbers, and I think I've got my head around what's going on here. Sheffield Wednesday are currently getting about 22,000 a game attendance. That sounds, for a club that's at the bottom of the championship, that sounds highly respectable. The problem is this: 17,000 of those are season ticket holders, and they paid for their season tickets in November 2024. So that money is long gone. So there's no money coming in from those season ticket holders, right? So yesterday there was an attendance of 22,000, 17,800 season ticket holders, call it 18,000 for the sake of argument, and 4,000 Coventry fans. So in other words, there were no Sheffield Wednesday fans buying a ticket for the match. So you then get the revenue from the Coventry fans, of course, so that they're a big club and they're doing well and it's not a big journey and all these types of things. So you get your 4,000 times 20 quid. So you get 80,000 from that. But with the Wednesday fans not buying anything inside the stadium, even the season ticket holders who do turn up, right? I'm told that the revenue inside the stadium yesterday was about 15 grand. Right, which is absolutely tiny. So the combined amount between the ticketing he would have taken from the Coventry fans and the amount taken inside the stadium is, let's call it 100 grand for the sake of argument. The cost of opening the entire stadium is going to be 20 to 25 grand in terms of the stewarding and all these types of things, etc. Probably a bit more than that. It's a big stadium. So what you're looking at here is that he probably made about 70,000 from that match yesterday. Now you get one of your solidarity payments in September, about 400,000 or 500,000, right? But even if you add 2 or 3 home games where you make 50, 60,000 each, and you've got your solidarity payments, your total income with the Wednesday fans no longer spending, and with you having pocketed all the season ticket money almost a year ago, your total income for the month is about, 800 grand, something like that. And you can't pay the wages out of 800 grand. It's not enough for the players and the staff and all these types of things, let alone all the other things you have to pay when you're running a football club. So basically, he can't meet the wages. And is constantly living a hand-to-mouth existence. He'll be waiting for the next bit of solidarity money to come in a couple of weeks' time, see if he can back pay some of September. And in the meantime, he's not willing to have sensible conversations with people about around the right type of valuation that's going on. With the club effectively already being, I wouldn't say effectively already relegated. In some matches, they've been reasonably competitive this season. But given the size of the squad, given the fact they're already, more or less bottom of the table and can, really find it very difficult to get points whatsoever, you can see that there's, what they call irresistible force and immovable objects going on here, right? At some point, very soon, there is going to be a big blow up, right? Because he just doesn't have any income. Does not have any income coming in, nowhere near enough to be able to pay wages and do things at the same time as the football regulator comes into effect, and will doubtless be seen as a damp squib if it can't get a grip on the Wednesday situation quite quickly. Over to you.
Well, I think you may have underestimated the cost of match day tickets for away fans at Hillsborough. I think they're probably double the 20 quid that you estimated. Tickets at Wednesday over recent seasons for away fans have been pretty hefty, but even so, I think
But you have to bear in mind concessions, Adrian. Right. So
Yeah,
I always talk about average ticket prices. Right.
yeah,
So in other
yeah.
words, for every dad that goes who you're charging 35 quid to, then you've got children and old age people and all this type of stuff. So it's not going to be radically different from that. And of course, most away clubs are not going to bring 4,000 fans.
No,
Right.
indeed,
Often it's
indeed.
going to be more like 1,000,
Yeah.
1,500, that type of thing.
Yeah, well, listen, we won't quibble about the figures. I'm sure your broad point is absolutely true at its heart. The other thing that's been said to me, and I was talking to somebody who works inside football this week, is that with respect to you, Charlie, as well, I think you may have underestimated the scale of what a new owner might need to do at Hillsborough. I think the person I was speaking to suggested really Hillsborough is not necessarily fit for purpose all in. I mean, yes, it can function as a football stadium, but you'll remember that one of the stands only passed its safety certificate just before the new season started. So if you were looking to seriously do a job at Sheffield Wednesday, rather than simply keeping the club alive, keeping it on life support, perhaps in League One, you might be looking at a total revamp of Hillsborough, which would cost what, 200-300 million pounds, which you would say that never mind the 60 million that Chansiri is after, he might struggle to give it away, truthfully, because I mean, it's a great club with a fantastic tradition, a wonderful fan base. None of this is said in any way to be disparaging of Sheffield Wednesday or its supporters, but I think Chansiri, the world of football better than I do in terms of who potential purchasers might be, Charlie. But I think, if Chansiri gave it away today, anybody coming in who wanted to maximise that potential at Sheffield Wednesday would be looking at north of 200 million quid.
Well, I don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why. So first of all, it is a fantastic club. For me, it's one of the great clubs, not just of English football, but of European football. It's in that absolute top echelon. It's the only club I can think of currently outside of the Premier League that you can realistically imagine being a top 10 Premier League club, right? You can just hit in terms of size of fan base, scale, history, oomph, punch, city, everything. It's a potential top 10 Premier League club. You think about your Evertons and these types of clubs. Wednesday's on that level all day long for me. Absolutely all day long. And has very little dislike about it. It's got a terrific fan base. Generally speaking, I think they've been unbelievably patient. Actually, I can imagine fan bases where including those of certain unnamed clubs that I've spoken to in the past, that even a quarter of what's gone on at Sheffield Wednesday you wouldn't be able to survive in the slightest. I think they've been patient. I think they've been understanding. I think even as long as 6 months ago, there were segments of the fan base saying, well, he hasn't been all bad. He's tried at times and all this type of stuff. It's actually not an affluent fan base. If you look going back about revenues and all this type of stuff. Now, you think about Hillsborough. So my first question is really how much does it take to make it safe to operate, properly safe to operate? Because the sheer numbers of fans that you've got means that even if you can just get the fans in a safe way, watching football, paying a reasonable price, your revenues are going to be very good by EFL standards outside the Premier League. And you can start to worry about, the absolute makeover of the whole thing, hospitality lounges and all that type of stuff. When you start to get into the upper echelons of that, and you're thinking about the Premier League, and you're thinking about, well, how are we going to compete against Tottenham Hotspur and that type of stuff? But in terms of competing against the types of clubs that I was watching yesterday, Oxford United, Watford, etc., Wednesday doesn't need Hillsborough to be the new White Hart Lane in order to be able to compete with those guys. What it needs is to be properly run. It needs to be properly run. It needs to have a medium-term strategy. And it needs everyone on board with that medium-term strategy to understand where the whole thing's going. Very similar program. The fans got on board. The whole train started moving in the right direction. Now they've got 25, 26,000 at the Valley every week, and they're doing really, really well. That's what Wednesday needs. And Wednesday can go an awful long way from where they currently are to where they need to get to, just off the back of Hillsborough being fit to operate. Money needs to be spent at the training ground. I would actually say that the money spent on the training ground is just as urgent as the money that needs to be spent on Hillsborough, because competing on the pitch means that you've got to be getting the football side a bit right. You've got to have a sensible football strategy, and the current training ground really isn't fit for purpose. So you're talking about 5 to 10 million on Hillsborough, but you're also talking about probably 5 to 10 million on the training ground as well, which kind of slightly stands up your point overall, which is that the right price for Sheffield Wednesday basically is as low as it possibly can be to make sure that as much capital as possible is deployed onto trying to resurrect the club to where it needs to go to, rather than going into the pocket of Dejphon Chansiri, who's almost wrecked the entire thing.
So for the regulator, this, I think, becomes ultimately a political question. And you and I have both supported the idea of a football regulator, an independent football regulator. That person is David Cogan. If you are the regulator who says to Dejphon Chansiri, you are not fit to run this football club because we don't, as a regulator, believe that you have a business plan to take this club forward in a viable way. I don't know if that's what the regulator would say, but they potentially might in light of what has happened at the club. And Dejphon Chansiri says, well, what are you going to do about it? And the regulator says, well, ultimately, we're going to withdraw your right to play in the English Football League so long as you are the owner, which, as I understand from what you've said, is their ultimate sanction. The demise of Sheffield Wednesday as a league club then goes back to the government that appointed the regulator. So there would be political blowback. Would any government, much less this government, which is embattled on so many fronts, want to be the one that was taking the heat for Sheffield Wednesday being kicked out of the league?
Well, I wonder if there's a safety valve here, which lies in Sheffield Wednesday's almost certain relegation. I wonder if they can withdraw the license to operate and effectively place Sheffield Wednesday in last place in the Championship, cancel the rest of their fixtures, which I know the league hates doing, absolutely hates doing, but the regulator might say to them, this is what we need to do, right? And basically says Sheffield Wednesday will start next season in League One. Right. And the players are then looked after in some way, shape or form. And there are various different valves for doing that, working with the PFA, free agency. Obviously, actually, the vast majority of Sheffield Wednesday players will not struggle to find a new club. They've actually got some pretty good players there. So there are various different ways in looking after players. What you could say is right, you are no longer going to play fixtures at all. Right, you're not in a position to sell season tickets. We're not going to let you operate as a football club owner. And you now have until this date to sell the club. Otherwise, the club will not be allowed to operate in League One next season either. So you've got a very narrow window of time to realise anything whatsoever. Now, I'm told that Chansiri is digging in for his fight against the regulator. I'm told that his own legal advice, goodness knows what that consists of, because he hasn't paid his legal bills on time as well, I'm told, in the past. So I'm not quite sure what the legal counsel would look like on this one. But I'm told that his view is that the regulator ultimately can't force him out. So it is shaping up to be a sort of very early totemic fight, battle, which ultimately, if you are the government, and I know you said they're embattled on several fronts, the government can't really afford for the regulator to lose this one. Because if the government, if the regulator is proven to be impotent against even an owner who is in such dire straits as Chansiri is right now, if he can't even get his teeth stuck into that, what message does that send out to other operators? Well, ultimately, it doesn't really matter what the guy says. Doesn't matter what Kogan says, because in the end, if we just dig our feet in, then we're just allowed to stay. So I'm not sure that the government or the football authorities can allow for that to be the case. So the next few months are going to be very interesting, because I think in some slightly coded but not very coded statements made by David Kogan in advance of the thing starting officially, because it's been operating as a shadow regulator for some time now anyway. So all the officials are in place and everyone's in place. It's just the moment at which it becomes statutory, legally in place to be able to actually do stuff. A couple of the statements that have been made have suggested, to me at least, perhaps I'm overreading it, I don't think I am, that indeed Sheffield Wednesday is top of the in tray. And all I can do is pray that this is a battle that the regulator wins, because you and I agree, this is one of the great clubs. It really is. It's one of the great clubs, and it's one of those things. If you think about your book, the battle for soul of English football, it's moments like this, isn't it? This is what it's all about. This is about making sure that these great historic social institutions are not allowed to be destroyed by bad actors. That's what it's about. It's a really important moment.
Absolutely. And on that point, Charlie, I should say, thank you for the plug again for my book, which is available now via Byline Books. Where's the Money Gone? The Battle for the Soul of English Football. Depending on when you listen to this,